I made the mistake the other day, as one does, of looking at the internet. And I was served up one of those clickbaity articles, Top 10 Worst TV Series Endings. All of the usual suspects were there, like The Sopranos and Dexter, and the one that hit hardest for me, which was Lost. Were any of you hooked on Lost? Sandy and I used to watch that show religiously. It was so compelling and groundbreaking. I mean, that show was killing off main characters way before Game of Thrones made it cool. Actually, Game of Thrones was on the list too. Bran the Broken, are you kidding me? Anyway, this article made me think about something that we read about in Torah this week. In case you were wondering, my plan is not just to rant about annoying nonsense that I saw on the internet. But when you think about these epic TV series, the ones with huge story arcs and all of the compelling characters and conflict and drama, it's amazing how invested you get in these shows. I remember with Lost in particular, when that show was still originally airing, the internet was filled with hotly debated fan theories about what was really going on. Who's Jacob? What the heck is with the smoke monster? And what's with that sequence of numbers? People were spending a huge chunk of their time and attention on trying to figure out what's going on and on what deep insight the producers are going to reveal, when in reality they're just trying to sell us Sprite and Verizon cell phones. And then, if you were a fan of the show, you know that when the eagerly awaited finale finally arrived, the punchline was a big, confusing mess of nonsense. There was no resolution, no big reveal, no sense to be made of all of the tangled drama that had you engrossed for so long. It was infuriating. So what is this to do with Torah? When you think of these epic TV shows that build and build on these compelling stories, by comparison, what could be more epic and compelling than the life story of Moses? I mean, even as a baby, Moses was condemned to death by a royal decree. He's floated down the Nile in a basket where he's rescued by Pharaoh's daughter, who raises him like a prince, only for Moses to kill an Egyptian taskmaster, forcing Moses to go on the lam, where he takes up sheep herding, has an encounter with God in the form of a bush that burns but is not consumed, is chosen by God to be God's messenger to Pharaoh, dukes it out with Pharaoh's court magicians, somehow convinces the Hebrew slaves to head off with him out of Egypt, across the Sea of Reeds and into the wilderness. He schleps 2 sets of stone tablets down the mountain, leads the Israelites all around the wilderness for almost 40 years, with the Israelites kvetching all the way, battling enemies and wild beasts and the elements as they make their way to the promised land. Now that is an epic story filled with drama and conflict and suspense. So how does Moses' epic life story end? Surely with all that build-up, he's going to lead his people into the promised land triumphantly. Everyone loves a happy ending, of course. But we all know that's not what happened. Instead, Moses gets to take the people literally to within sight of the promised land, the climax of his epic life story, but Moses himself will never enter the land. Talk about worst TV series endings ever. And in this week's Parsha, we find out why. Our Parsha is Chukat, and I want to focus particularly on the book of Numbers, chapter 20. To set the scene, Moses' sister Miriam has just died. You'll recall that according to our tradition, Miriam was the one who had the special knack for finding water for the people in the wilderness. With Miriam now gone, this creates a crisis, and as has happened so many times before, the people revolt and complain to Moses, whining once again that they would have been better off if they had never left slavery in Egypt. And as has happened so many times before, Moses and Aaron ask God for help with all the complainers. Here's what God says to Moses. This is Numbers chapter 20, verses 7 and 8. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the staff and assemble the community, you and Aaron your brother, and you shall speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will yield its water, and you shall bring forth water for them from the rock and give drink to the community and to its beasts." So Moses and Aaron take the staff as God commanded and assemble the people. But what does Moses do? This is Numbers 20, verses 10 and 11. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, pray, rebels, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock?" And Moses raised his hand, and he struck the rock twice, and abundant water came out, and the community with its beasts drank. So mission accomplished, right? No. In fact, the very next thing that happens is God tells Moses and Aaron that they've just screwed up so royally that they aren't going to be given the chance to lead the people into the promised land. But what exactly went wrong? There's a long tradition that suggests that Moses hit the rock in anger instead of speaking to it, and this is what God didn't like. Was hitting the rock the big no-no? You might recall that this story seems a little familiar. It's actually not the first time that people were griping with Moses about a lack of water. In Exodus chapter 17, God tells Moses to take the staff he used in Egypt and to strike the rock and start water flowing. You'd think that since God told Moses to strike the rock the last time, Moses would be justified in thinking that this is how things are done. Let's look at exactly what God tells Moses and Aaron in Numbers 20, verse 12. And Adonai said to Moses and to Aaron, "Inasmuch as you did not trust me to sanctify me before the eyes of the Israelites, even so you shall not bring this assembly to the land that I have given to them." Did God tell Moses, "Hey, I didn't say hit the rock"? No. Did God say, "Hey, what's with the angry outburst"? No. So what exactly did Moses do wrong? Let's go back to verse 10. And Moses and Aaron gathered the assembly in front of the rock and said to them, "Listen, pray, rebels, shall we bring forth water for you from this rock?" It wasn't that Moses let his temper get the better of him. It wasn't even that Moses was bad at following instructions carefully. What Moses did that earned him the worst epic life story ending ever is that Moses took the credit for himself instead of giving that credit to God, to whom it was due. What does this teach us about God and about our relationship with God? It seems to me that first and foremost it teaches us that God doesn't like hubris. But what do I mean? Everyone's at least a little bit full of themselves, aren't they? I know I am. Or surely everyone's at least a little bit selfish, a little bit self-interested. You're supposed to look after yourself first before you can help other people, right? That's what the flight attendants always say about oxygen masks. But obviously, there's something different going on here. Remember, Moses is God's guy. Why would God impose such a severe penalty for what seems like it could have been an innocent slip of the tongue? Didn't we just learn last week in Parshat Korach that God backed Moses up when Korach and his supporters accused Moses of being too full of himself? God didn't punish Moses and Aaron then. It's actually Korach and his followers who are on the wrong end of that whole situation. So how is this situation different? And why did God come down so hard on Moses? I'm going to suggest to you that it's because God holds leaders to a higher standard. Why would this be? Because leaders can lead people in the wrong direction. This is what Moses did by setting himself up as the savior of the people instead of reminding the people that God has been and continues to take care of them. This is a very dangerous way to think, and it's a slippery slope. When you start to get too full of yourself, you go from a place of thankfulness to God to a place of self-righteousness. Before long, you start to think that all the good things in your life are coming to you because you're just getting what you deserve. From there, it's very easy to find yourself thinking that if you get what you deserve, then other people must also be getting what they deserve. When what they're getting is less than you, and especially when what they're getting is a raw deal, it's all too easy to shrug it off as not your problem because, after all, aren't they just getting what they deserve? You can see that God clearly wouldn't want anyone to start thinking this way, and it's easy to see why God wouldn't be happy about Moses starting to lead the people down this dangerous path. So why is this story about Moses' big screw-up in Torah? Is it just for the sake of historical accuracy? No, everything in Torah is there to teach us something. It applies to everyone throughout all of time. The tricky but important part is for us to figure out how it applies to us in our time. Remember, the very first commandment is, I am Adonai, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slaves. God expects us to remember who's in charge and that we, the children of Israel, owe God a serious debt of loyalty. And in Exodus 19, verse 6, God said, you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And in Isaiah 42, verse 6, I created you and appointed you a covenant for peoples, a light of the nations. We, the whole Jewish people, are expected to be leaders. God has told us to be leaders by living exemplary lives. As we read in our own Siddurim in the English translation of the Aleinu, we are all partners in Tikkun Olam, the mending of the world. In our parsha this week, we learn that no less a person than Moses himself was susceptible to the trap of putting himself before God, of making an idol out of himself, if you will. And we also learned that no matter how epic your life is meant to be, if you let this happen, you could end up with an unsatisfying, unhappy ending. But luckily for us, we have the Torah to help us learn from the mistakes of others. This week, from Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher himself. We know that we, each of us as individuals and all of us together as a Jewish community, have been given the important task of living exemplary lives, of being good role models for each other and for the nations. How do we do that? The Torah is full of examples. We know that it's our responsibility to feed the hungry, to welcome the stranger, to comfort the bereaved, and to protect the vulnerable. These and many other things besides are the values that we're to live by according to our scriptures and our time-honored traditions. Unlike our ancestors in the wilderness, we don't have a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to remind us that God is always with us, taking care of us and showing us the way forward. But we do have something even better. We have the Torah and centuries of the collected wisdom of our tradition. And with all of that, we're well equipped to make sure that we don't end up in our own worst TV series ending ever. Shabbat Shalom.